All right, for more on the results, we are joined by University of Johannesburg's Professor Sarita Ramsaroop, as well as the Governing Body Foundation CEO Dr Anthea Cereseto. And just before we start our conversation with them, I just want to give you our question for the day on Newsfeed PM. The Independent Examinations Board has achieved an overall pass rate of 98.7%. How do you think they got it right? Share your views with us via WhatsApp on 072 110 5584. Or you can also give us a call on 010-594-6010. Now let's get into our conversation. Prof and Doc, thank you so much for your time this evening and for joining us. I mean, the Minister of Basic Education has now announced those results, that 87.3% for the 2024 matric cohort. Speak to us, perhaps, Prof, let's begin with you in terms of what your interpretation of these numbers are.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and good evening to all of your listeners as well. I think it's very, very encouraging to see an improvement of approximately 4.4% on a national level, as well as across all provinces as well. You know, it speaks to the investment that the Department of Basic Education has been plowing into education over the years, and you're culminating. And as the Minister has mentioned as well, that we're seeing the system. There's a maturity in the system at this point in time. We've looked at all of the difficulties that plagued students, the learners, as well as teachers, and they were targeted professional development that has been taking place, and you can see all of that culminating in huge strides in the results that was announced today. So I'm very excited about what has actually transpired. We can see that the investment that we've been putting into the system we're seeing the fruits of that at this point in time, and of course what the next steps from here, which one can take forward as well at a later stage.
Doc, I mean, the Minister speaks of these being the best results since the dawn of democracy, the best, in fact, that South Africa has produced. I mean, what factors do you truly believe, because Prof speaks of the investment that has been made over time for us to get to where we are? What's your take in terms of what got us here?
If we have to look at the great strides that we've made, especially in the lower quintiles, quintile 1 to 3, you can see huge improvements, especially in these particular schools. And of course, the investments that we talk about was greater resources provided to the lower quintiles, greater support in the form of teacher development. If we also have to look at the feeding schemes, especially in the primary schools, that has actually contributed towards improvements in this particular area. Teacher development, I know there's a lot of targeted teacher development happening or taking place across, from primary schools right up to high schools, that support teachers in the work that they are doing. Coupled with that as well, I know that we may not necessarily directly link to this, but I think we must also acknowledge that the grants from the social systems to the beneficiaries, and you could see the data that aligns with the learners that have been getting the grants versus the outcomes of that, and you could see improvements in that. So I know there's a lot of dissension and discussion about why are we investing so much in social grants, but if you have to look at the improvements today in the matric results from our beneficiaries, that in itself is telling that we're doing good work in this area and the investment, and we can see the fruits of that investment as well.
Dr. Cereseto, let's bring you into the conversation right now. We heard the Deputy Minister speaking there about that 30% pass mark, and that's not necessarily what is expected for our matrics to receive a senior certificate. Do we factor in the quality of education when we look at these marks, at this percentage that the 2024 matriculants have achieved?
Indeed, yes. Thank you. Good evening. The analysis that we're given in the technical briefing covers everything. And just to deal with this matter of the quality of passes, it's one of the social justice aims of our whole system is quality. And there's not much point in sending children to school and not getting quality. So everybody is determined to improve the quality by whatever means. And you have already heard some of the strategies that have been used and have been successful. So when we had the results today, one of the big improvements is the percentage of learners qualifying for bachelor degree entrance. So that's gone up substantially. The real problem there, however, is that there are over 300,000 learners now who qualify for higher education places, but actually they're not available because we have a lack of capacity in the higher education sector. So that is a major issue that we do have to deal with, and that's a worry. So while we might be producing higher achievement in the school level, we now might have disappointed learners who can't find a place in universities or actually won't be able to get the funding for that. But the quality has improved, and that was one of our benchmarking tools. Look at the entrance to university. That's gone up substantially in numbers, the percentage as a whole. The other end, and I want to deal with this 30%ers because it is, it is something that's in the media, and, a particular person or people are promoting a 50% pass mark as a minimum pass. There are many arguments that we have to have on that matter. But just to say, there were fewer than 1% of this total cohort that got anywhere near the 30%ers. That would be the lowest kind of qualification. There are 4 levels: bachelor entrance, then you get diploma level, then you get higher certificates, and then you get a pass. Less than 1% got that lowest category of national senior certificate. So there aren't the 30%ers. It was something 0.017 or something like that, a very, very small number. I think it was 121 of these 700,000 candidates got in that bottom category. So we have made improvements when it comes to quality. I don't know if you want to follow up with something else.
Well, I mean, you speak of just also, Doc, the reason why, and Prof also touched on this with regards to over 500,000 children that did pass their matric this year who are receiving grants, and how the Department of Social Development is really assisting in ensuring that those children go to school at least with food in their stomach so that they are able to concentrate. How much more do you believe needs to be done in order for us to be able to have more children who are receiving grants, and therefore we can produce such numbers?
There is a problem with the grants. 70% of the learners who passed matric were on grants. That's an enormous percentage in our country. And the thing about the grants is that they stop as soon as the learner turns 18. And 18 is the year in which they write matric. So there's a disconnect there. So they're no longer children, and that's why they don't qualify for that grant. But just for information, the 17-year-olds who still qualify, so they call them the active grant recipients, got a 92-point-something% pass rate. In other words, they were well above the national pass rate. Those children that are receiving grants but are still age 17 or younger. That's quite an important statistic. It really backs up, and we have said this for quite a number of years now, the importance of children, learners, even the 18-year-olds as well, needing basic necessities. You cannot learn if those fundamental basic necessities aren't taken care of. We talk about a hierarchy of needs, and if those lower needs are not met, intellectual operations can't function so well. And so making sure they are safe and they have food, they have shelter, and the grants do help achieve that to some extent. It's not perfection. So yes, we have to take care of our children in our society. It's an expensive endeavor. It's difficult for our country under these financial constraints, and that's another matter affecting the system. But the truth is, the aid that learners are given in terms of the social support is critical. We can also add there, and I think it would be important to add, we also need some psychosocial support. And so many schools, many teachers are asking for more social workers or psychologists to give that kind of support to learners. So while they might have the nutrition and limited financial resources, they also need something for their mental well-being.
Of course. Prof, I want to take us back to a point that Doc made at the beginning of her comments, and that was with regards to now a little over half of the students that wrote qualified for a bachelor's pass, meaning they can now enroll at a university. And we know that there's very limited space in our universities across the country. What role do these tertiary institutions play in ensuring that many of these students don't then fall through the cracks, because they are then given options of TVET colleges? But if you've worked hard to obtain a bachelor's pass, there certainly is an aim for you to get into a university to study for a degree.
That's an important point that you make. Every university has a certain cap in the number of students that one can take. I know at the University of Johannesburg, we had over 600,000 applicants, but we have about 10,900 spaces. So what that means is that, unfortunately, there's going to be a number of learners that's going to be turned away. And although you may have applied for a specific career choice that you would have liked to take and you would have liked to pursue, you may not necessarily get into that. So learners would have to think about options B and C in that regard. And I think that's where we are failing our learners as well. Not all learners who may not necessarily get into university spaces, but what about the avenues for the TVET colleges, as well as your other spaces in the skills area as well? There are many areas that learners are very, very skilled in these particular areas, but they don't have opportunities and there's not enough spaces for them to be able to actually join these areas as well. At university levels, if the numbers are capped, one cannot actually exceed that, one cannot go over that. But we do know that when in certain particular faculties, if the numbers have not yet been met, learners can apply. They open up the system and you can apply. So learners should be actually keeping an eye out on communication from universities to see exactly if they have not been accepted, what are the other avenues that they can actually in the options B and C as well. That is unfortunate, and that is a systemic issue that one has to deal with across the country, across all universities, unfortunately.
Of course. Dr. Cereseto, just on that point still, then what do you think would be our long-term strategies and our goals if we're seeing more and more matriculants wanting that bachelor pass? Could we partner with neighboring countries that possibly do have space in their universities while we build more universities across the country?
Yes, that could be an option, but then of course it comes at a cost as well. Who's going to be funding it? Of course, one can search and look out for bursary options when we do partner with international institutions. But I think we need to start changing the narrative as well about entry to universities, the only way that I can achieve success in one's career choices. We need to actually start promoting TVET colleges, PCTA areas, which could offer alternate pathways to our learners. There's huge successes from our learners that enter these spaces as well. So, and every learner has some kind of strengths in their abilities. Not all of them would be academically inclined. We do know that if we have to look at the results, the maths, the science, although there has been a slight improvement in maths, I do know that in the first year, the learners, when they enter university spaces, they really struggle with passing these particular gateway subjects, and which means that they're not adequately prepared to function optimally at a higher education institution. So what would be the other avenues in that particular respect as well is something that one needs to actually consider. I do really think that we need to start changing the narrative imperative that it's only entry into a higher education institution that you will be a success in society, that you will get a job, and that you will find employment thereafter, which is actually quite incorrect as well.
Dr. Cereseto, your take on that narrative?
Yes, so it was in fact raised in our meeting with the Director General today, and I've raised it in years before. And he started speaking about having to re-look at how we do university education, and it doesn't necessarily all have to be campus-based, that we can start to diversify the mode of higher education, especially for the more senior students in the university, third and fourth years, less campus time, even less engagement possibly with lecturers, but it's a long-term thing. Look at different modes of delivery of higher education. But the other thing is, and he's been saying this for years as well, is we need to turn upside down our proportions of academically qualified NSC people and technically qualified NSC people if we compare ourselves with other countries where we have the majority of our learners getting the NSC and the academic stream. It's because that's where the prestige is. And it's really difficult to change that mindset in South Africa because it's what families have aspired to have a first-generation graduate, is what families aspire to. Now you tell them, actually, that's a bad idea. Rather go to TVET and follow a more technical course, more practical course. Many people don't see the prestige in that. The fact that it could lead to more ready employment is overlooked because of the prestige. So it's a long-term thing, and we really have to do a lot of advocacy and mindset changing. And we have to change how we as people see different careers. I had a colleague, and when she went to a gathering and they were all talking and they said, "What do you do?" And she said, "I'm a teacher." And the gathering all turned their backs on her and went on talking with the others, the lawyers and the doctors and so on. That's not such a great career. And of course, as teachers, and we're involved in teaching, and I've been for 50 years involved in education, it's really problematic if we don't value other things. And, parents will be very proud when they've got their doctor and their lawyer, and then maybe the next one could be the teacher. And in the old days, we used to talk about ministers of religion. That came next. Or, there was a hierarchy of how professions were respected. We need to change that, because we know who's employed in society. And when we have a problem in our home, we know who we have to phone, and we know there's a waiting list to get service for certain things. But how we see those people is not correct.
Right.
We don't have the right mindset for that at the moment to promote what really is needed for the country. We know where the unemployed graduates who come and do work in schools, and then some of them actually decide to move into teaching, but they've been unemployed because their particular field of study is oversubscribed and there's no place for them in the workplace. So very important. So the Director General really wants to push the TVETs and wants to raise over time the level of the qualifications that they can issue, because at the moment they're only going up to level 4, I think, but pushing it to level NQF level 5 and 6, which would take it into the higher diplomas and degree level. And like the old technicons that existed, which were an intermediary between technical colleges and universities, you had the technicon.
Of course. Ladies, let's just hold that conversation there. I'm sorry, Prof, can we just hold it there? We quickly need to take a break. But when we do return, I just want us to touch on some of those resource and funding, as well as social issues that many of our matriculants face, and of course the solutions that we could have, especially for the 2025 cohort. So do stay with us as we continue this conversation regards the matric results that were released today. Stay with us. And welcome back. We continue our discussion as the Minister of Basic Education has released the results for the 2024 cohort. I'm joined in studio by the University of Johannesburg's Professor Sarita Ramsaroop, as well as the Governing Body Foundation CEO Dr Anthea Cereseto, speaking to us and just giving us analysis and looking at the health of the Department of Basic Education, both the basic education in terms of the public schools and the private schools that have also released their results today. Ladies, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, we had a discussion a little earlier on with regards to just those allocations of students who have passed with their bachelor's and will not necessarily find space within the country's universities. But we also know that the minister within her speech spoke about 1.2 or over 1.2 million of these learners who started grade 1 in 2013, but only 724,000 had enrolled in 2024 in order to write their matric exams. But she also speaks that the misconception is not that the children are lost within the system, but more so that some of them at grade 9 already switched to technical and vocational and training colleges in order for them to be able to find skills in that regard. Doc, maybe let's just begin with you in terms of looking at those numbers and those options. Are we seeing a lot of our children, especially at grade 9, taking that option of moving out of the traditional schooling system into the TVET colleges?
Not 100% known. We did discuss that also in the meeting. They are relatively low numbers. They are moving into independent schools sometimes, and yes, some of them do leave the system entirely. But they are going into other pathways of education, some less formal even, because they're entitled to leave school if they complete grade 9. So it may not actually be in the formal TVET colleges. It can be other forms of education, informal even. And they come back and they register for qualifications maybe when they're 20, 21, 22. They actually come back. And we saw that in the statistics as well. They come back to upgrade their qualifications to get the formal qualification. So, and it is sometimes a societal a poverty issue or some other issue. Learner pregnancy is also a cause, although there are very strict rules now in the system that pregnant learners must be helped to remain at school and to continue their education with a small interruption. So there is improvement in that, what we call throughput. But just making an assumption that we have lost all of those children completely to education is not true, because there are other options of education, and some of them are not easily tracked. It's a reality, but there is also improvement. So it's another one of those statistics where the system saw improvement. So the percentage now is at 63, 64%, and that's up about 5 or 6%, I think, from previous years. So that throughput is also increasing. And I think what was quite important in the statement that was issued by the minister and in our meeting with the DG was that 64% is actually an acceptable, normal number for what they call a middle-income country. So our country is performing satisfactorily in terms of countries of equal financial standing, economic standing. It's not, we don't want to be necessarily just in the middle and just average. We would like to be better. And certainly the country will continue to try to improve. And I would expect continued improvement. I don't think this year was an aberration. I think it is part of systemic improvement. I just say this now, and then the Prof will probably add some more at this, that we've had earlier grade systemic reports, grade 3, 6, and 9 learner performance and how things were not so marvelous at those levels. But it did show that as learners progressed up the system, they did start to perform better. And it would seem that it takes longer for our learners to reach those learning goals. And I am afraid that quite often our system forces people, children, teachers, to move at a pace that is faster than they're actually capable of doing. There's a computer system that you've got to enter your marks into by certain dates and so on. And that means your children have to have been taught the information and have learned it. Now, there's a difference between teaching it and the children learning it. And I don't think we have, over the years, from grade R all the way up, emphasized the need for mastery before you move to the next concept. And I think that's what we need to work on, to avoid these matric camps, summer camp, winter camp, October, spring camp, Saturday holidays. I had to deal with a case where a child was forbidden to go to a parent's funeral because the child had to attend Saturday school. That's not acceptable. You know, people have to have learners. These grade 12s do need some recreational time. They need a balanced life. Yes, put in more effort in matric. No argument there. You have to put in the effort. Yes, absolutely no argument with that. But there are limits, and I think maybe we've got to the point where we push too hard. There's a lot of competition, and if you watched the on television or were present at the announcement, you would have seen the frenzied competition amongst the provincial leaders, the HODs, the district directors, and even MECs. And I think we've got to be cautious there, otherwise we're affecting mental well-being and general health, and it's not sustainable forever. We need to consolidate learning much more consistently in all the lower grades.
Of course. Ladies, I just want us, we are running out of time, to just move the conversation a little bit more with regards to resources and infrastructure. And I mean, Prof, we saw the province of Mpumalanga with a significant increase of 8%, but these are also just some of these provinces in the rural areas that, when it comes to resources and infrastructure, often have bear the brunt of not having enough or space for children to be able to sufficiently sit in a classroom with 30, 40 of them as opposed to higher numbers. How do you think we need to be improving as a country with regards to resource allocation when it comes to our learners?
Certainly we've always, the research together with much of the advice provided is that the rural areas need to be provided with greater resource allocation. The problem is the infrastructure. While we talk about connectivity, we want them to be more ICT and technologically in line with what's happening in the urban areas. You find that the infrastructure is not in place, and that needs to be done. But the biggest obstacle as well is that when this is put in place and the schools are equipped with your up-to-date smart boards or your ICT computers to support teachers, to support the learners, you find that these schools are then subjected to the plagues of society such as burglaries, etc. And I think that's where community support is so important. The department and the school cannot be left on their own, but the community needs to be actually able to support the schools, to be able to ensure that the resources don't have legs and move away, as well as the parental support in that particular area. So while you may be able to have that there is investment, you have on the flip side the security of that investment, because we do not want that the department plows millions of rands into a particular school, but by the very next year, one cannot account for the resources that has been plowed into those schools. So we have to actually have a multi-pronged approach to actually investment and to improvement in the rural schools over and above that. I think also, especially in rural schools, teachers do not want to go and teach in those areas. So I know that in the past that there was additional incentives for teachers to be able to teach in these areas, but more needs to be done in that particular area to be able to attract teachers to stay in these schools and to support the children in these areas as well. Lesego.
Dr. Cereseto, I mean, we saw even tonight at the ceremony, a few what seemingly looked like teachers were holding up placards that said, "Stop teacher cuts," just speaking to how much of the labor that is needed within this industry is being cut off. Just speak to us in terms of, as a governing body, what are your takes on these cuts and how do we balance things off?
The teacher cuts are a severe problem, worse in some provinces than in others. You know, some provinces haven't cut their teachers, but they haven't produced more money, so they will be cutting somewhere else. And that would be resources and other kinds of support in schools. So the teacher cuts caused by the financial constraints of the country would appear to be inevitable. The minister has explained what she has done, how important it is. We cannot have 170 in a class. That was told to us in the meeting this week. 170 in a classroom because it's not good allocation of that school's resources, but that's what ended up. You cannot teach. That is simply what I would call babysitting. They're just child minding with a little bit of input, but we cannot get mastery of basic concepts when you actually don't have a qualified teacher in a reasonable classroom with a reasonable number of learners. And a reasonable number, we can accept that 40 is the number that has been stated, and that's for primary schools, and maybe foundation phase should be lower and not 40 because it doesn't make sense to have so many in a foundation phase classroom when they're starting off their learning. So that can be looked at, but there isn't the funding. And so we have this real tension now with the minister working with Treasury, trying to see how they can remediate. We've had court cases in KwaZulu-Natal, I think 3 court cases, as KwaZulu-Natal tries to cut their numbers in order to match their budget. And there have been court cases to overrule the department's action because it came too late. The schools can't adjust their timetables now with the reduced number of teachers. So absolutely 100% teachers are a critical element. Of course, the teachers have to be competent. They have to be qualified in their subjects. They have to be teachers that want to teach and who attend school properly and are not, frequently absent. So we need, good teachers in classrooms on every day of the school year as far as possible. But the class size has to be moderated to something that is at an acceptable level. We understand constraints, so we can make some concessions, but we cannot go over a particular number because then we are wasting money because it's fruitless.
Ladies, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you so much for your inputs. It certainly has been valuable this evening, and we certainly do hope, we've seen a great percentage coming out of this year's matric cohort. It can only get better going into the future. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So that was University of Johannesburg Professor Sarita Ramsaroop, as well as the CEO of the Governing Body Foundation, Dr. Anthea Cereseto.